Hello, everyone. A very happy Tuesday to all of you. You know what Tuesday brings for us. It brings another night of story time. Tonight we continue in our reading of Gifted by D.W. Lewis. Of course, if you have missed any of the previous chapters, youtube.com/@SirArminius is your location to get all of those. Every chapter we have read so far has been recorded and placed on the YouTube channel for your listening enjoyment. Listen to it once, twice, thrice even. 100 times? That might be too many, but I won't begrudge you it. If you like the book, maybe support the author. Go pick it up. Available on Amazon. Maybe elsewhere, but Amazon's where I know it at. So let's talk a little bit about what happened last time, shall we? Cal, Ovette, Shay, all made their way from Undis to Valewind. They were met by Dredge's contact at Valewind. The contact happened to be Quentin. We all remember Quentin was the contact, got them onto a nice, fancy old ship, got them from Undis to Valewind. They got there and they met up with the local resistance cell, which was run at the moment by Jord. We all remember Jord. And they almost got their butts kicked on their way in. They had to do some fancy legwork to make it through, but they made it through okay and survived. They found that Artie had been captured by the Inquisitors and the Prefects, and he was due to be executed. So they made their plan to go and save him. Wasn't a good plan. They just planned to show up and somehow save him. But they got there, and Ovette finds that her friend that had been with her with the Lord Inquisitor is getting ready to be executed as well, Clara. So she goes all white fire, kills some Inquisitors. A prefect almost kills her. Cal jumps in the way and takes the bullet meant for Ovette. Cal is hurt. Ovette heals him. But they know that's going to bring down the Lord Inquisitor and all of the people on them. So they decide that the only thing that they can really do from here is go and destroy the third chain. So they make a plan. They go into the Citadel to destroy the chain. While they are traveling through there, Cal is losing time and having wacky things happen to him. And they've been traveling along for hours, and he doesn't remember any of it. Then he comes back to himself. They have lost Quentin somewhere along the way. And when he comes back to himself, he feels the chain calling him. And so they make their way to the chain room, led by Cal. They get in there, and just as he is getting ready to do his thing, Quentin shows up. You guys remember Quentin? Quentin the Bastard shows up. And he's on the wrong side. He's a traitor, and he has a knife to Artie's throat. And who walks in but the Lord Inquisitor himself? Not only does he walk in, but he calls Cal by a name we have never heard before. Our last reading ended with the phrase, "We meet again at last, Callus." Callous, not just Cal. Callous. And that is where we will pick up our reading for this evening, starting in chapter 30, with the Lord Inquisitor having shown up, a knife to Artie's throat. There are multiple other Inquisitors in the room, and we don't know what's coming next. So, let's find out together, shall we? As a reminder, I do record all of these chapters. You can catch all the recordings on youtube.com/@SirArminius. But it also means I will not engage with you while I'm reading the chapter because I'm recording it. However, I will be happy to engage between chapters. So, sit back, relax, get yourself a cup of tea, a nice warm blanket, maybe some popcorn, whatever makes you happy. And let's dive in to our next chapter, starting with 30. The Lord Inquisitor paced back and forth, clasped hands resting at the small of his back. He held his chin to his chest, a crooked grin stretched across his mouth as if he were satisfied with his own genius. The crease in his brow was a dead giveaway of a man choosing his next words with care, the most dangerous man in the realm, savoring the moment. The rest of the room fell away as Cal locked onto his mortal enemy. The urge to leap into action, to cut him down where he stood, was overwhelming, but some impulse stayed his hand, an impulse he was certain belonged to the chain. "I've been looking forward to seeing you again, Callus." The Lord Inquisitor's voice slithered through the silence. "There's so much to discuss with you, so much to catch you up on." "Why do you keep calling me that?" Cal grimaced, directed more at his own curiosity than the Lord Inquisitor himself. Nothing this monster said should matter, yet the question loosed itself anyway. Though unsure of what had suddenly brought this on, he was tired of feeling that like he was one step behind everything, everyone, all the time. He was tired of just being an attack dog, told by others what or whom he needed to kill. The Lord Inquisitor was evil, deserving of the justice that Cal would render, but he refused to let ignorance blind him any longer. The Lord Inquisitor stopped his pacing and looked Cal dead in the eye. "What else would I call my grandson?" "My name is Cal." The Lord Inquisitor laughed, the echo of his self-satisfied mirth filling the chamber. His escort of death-wrapped Inquisitors twitched behind him. "I should have known Leifestus was the one hiding you away in that rebel of an orphanage. All these years, I thought you died along with your mother and father. Believe me, if I had known it was you." His expression softened, and he cupped his hands together. "Well, no use dwelling on what can't be changed. What matters now is that we have a chance to move forward. Together." "You know nothing about me or my parents." Rage bubbled under Cal's skin. A clearer mind might have been concerned that the rage felt alien, not of his own making. But right now, the heat that spread out from his chest felt good. It made him feel light and strong. The Lord Inquisitor closed the gap between them, coming within striking range. "Oh, I know more about them, and you, than you realize, Callus." "Stop calling me that." "I know that you've always felt different from the others around you, an outcast by no fault of your own. I know you've struggled with accepting that you cannot feel Eudos's gift like the others." The Lord Inquisitor stepped closer still. "And most importantly," he stopped just inches away from Cal, a breath's distance, and lowered his voice to a whisper. "I know about the voices in your head." He extended his hand toward Cal, his defenses wide open. I can tell you about our family's lineage, why our blood is special, why it makes us superior. Isn't that something you've always wanted? To know where you came from, to know there was a place you belonged. You need only take my hand, and that knowledge is yours. He's lying to you, Cal. Don't listen to him, Ovette cut in, shaking on the spot. His words are poison. The Lord Inquisitor turned, his expression a mix of parental warmth and a viper's spite. Ah, Ovette, it pleases me to no end to see you alive and well. I take it my men have not given you too much trouble. I must admit, I was concerned for your safety ever since these rebels stole you away from me. Ovette spat at his feet. He recoiled, taken aback by Ovette's entirely unladylike response. More lies, Cius. You plastered my face on wanted posters and placed a bounty on my head. Named me rebel and usurper. You were a snake who used me for his own gain. Had the people of this realm learned of their matriarch's abduction, it would have caused mass hysteria in the streets. Your people continue to mourn your loss. Your death has united them more than your life ever did. Can't you see? This was what was best for everyone. And what about Clara? Ovette screamed. You ordered her execution. The Lord Inquisitor's face twitched, as if hearing a piece of unwanted news. Word of Ovette's display in the execution square had undoubtedly reached his table, but his look was not one of guilt, more of annoyance that the execution had been stopped. Ah, yes. Regrettable business, all that. Clara was a sweet girl and loyal to our cause. But the people needed someone to blame. And who better than the handmaiden who attended the matriarch? The one trusted with her care and safety. You're a monster! Wrong! The Lord Inquisitor snapped, his face showing the first real signs of emotion as he bit back at Ovette. I am a steward of this wretched realm, one charged with keeping order, and order shall reign at any cost. You took me from my home. You killed the people I loved, locked me away in the sanctum and made me believe, made me think. I gave you purpose, gave you everything you needed to do your duty. A duty you have squandered. The Lord Inquisitor's bitterness bled into every word. You were to become their Gyfted, their icon, a beacon that would bring the masses to heal peacefully. His chin quivered as he took a calming breath and twisted his jaw, tugging at the collar of his breastplate, his voice slithering back into softness as he spoke. There is still time to fulfill that duty, my dear. Return to my side, become the people's matriarch once more, and we can forget about these rebellious urges of yours. I am not a tool to be used by you, Ovette screamed, unable to control herself any more. Her frustration reddened her cheeks, and her eyes blazed with an otherworldly glow. I had hoped we could resolve this without violence. The Lord Inquisitor sighed. Unlike you, my dear, I am willing to see my duty through to the letter. If the Gyfted is to die here, then so be it. Your death shall eventually herald the arrival of a new host, and I am a patient man. Again, unlike you, I have the luxury of time. He motioned for his deadly retinue to move forward. Shay and George stood rooted to the spot, their fear and powerlessness painted across their faces with broad strokes. The parts of Cal that were still his own cried out for action. He strained against the invisible force holding him back and tried to will his unresponsive limbs to move. But no matter how hard he tried, they wouldn't move. The effort quickened his heartbeat, making it thump harder in his chest. Callus, I give you one last chance to abandon your needless crusade of defiance. Put an end to all this conflict, and I give you my word that your friends shall leave here unharmed. All you have to do is come home. The chain's presence slammed against Cal's mind. It squirmed in his skull and tried its best to force him into submission. He cried out in horror as his mental defenses began to crumble. Thoughts of his years growing up in the embers flooded his mind, of people who spat in the street as he walked by, calling him hollowborn and guiding their children away from him. The heat from his chest spread further into his limbs, a creeping fire that used his resentment as fuel. He had suffered for so long, been victimized and treated as a lesser person his entire life for something he had no control over. None had turned to help him. Even Lady Havisham, someone who was supposed to be a mother for the lost children of Embers, had treated him like he was less than dirt. She'd trusted him in the end, thrust a dagger into his hands and pleaded with him to find Ovette. She'd put her faith in him to bring her home. Home to Leif, to the warmth of his voice as it filled the cramped, misshapen rooms of the orphanage, with its many nooks and crannies. His mind turned to the trinkets he'd stolen to make Ovette smile, and the simple comfort of having a space to call their own. Comfort he'd found again in Shay, in his friendship with Artie, and even Jord. They'd all placed their trust in him. No, he whispered, still deep within his own thoughts. The Jane's influence wavered, and the burrowing heat within him abated for a moment. I had a home, one that you tried to burn to the ground. The room snapped back into painful focus. The chain's will writhed beneath his skin, but he held firm to his defiance. There is nothing you could say that would make me betray my friends, my family. I don't care who you are, or who you think I am. With visible effort, Cal wrenched the blade shard up. I've waited years to kill you, and nothing is going to stand in my way. The Lord Inquisitor cocked his eyebrow, as if he were dealing with a disobedient child. He retracted his open hand and rested it instead on the hilt of the obsidian sword riding at his hip. So much like your father. A pity. I had hoped to do this without damaging your body. His gaze marked the writhing tendrils under Cal's skin. Well, more than it already is. His blade slid free, and he dropped into a practiced dueling stance. The runes that ran the length of the blade hummed in sync with the chain. Come then, Cal. Seize your opportunity. Cal exploded into an attack. He swung the blade shard at a shallow angle, aiming to further close the distance and take out his opponent's legs. Steel shrieked as the Lord Inquisitor parried with the discipline of a veteran blade master, his form flawless. Before Cal had a moment to think, the Lord Inquisitor countered with lightning speed. Cal ducked left, the blade slicing a shallow cut into his cheek, and darted inside of the older man's guard, slashing wildly. Whatever influence the chain held over Cal ebbed and flowed, a seesaw of control that both hindered and fueled him, a delicate balance doomed to break. Matching Cal's speed, the Lord Inquisitor leapt back, delivering a backhanded strike with the flat of his blade that rang Cal's skull like a bell. Cal bellowed with rage, his grip tightening around both the hilt of the blade shard and Ovette's coin pouch. His rage fueled each strike, driving him to thrust and cut with unnatural speed. But it didn't make a difference. The Lord Inquisitor deflected every blow with ease, countering and parrying as if he were sparring with a junior swordsman, as if this were a mere morning exercise, not a fight for survival. Heat flared behind Cal as white gift fire streaked past, kissing his shoulder. The Lord Inquisitor had just enough time to chuckle to himself before he sliced through the arcane blast, the air hissing as the gift dissipated into nothingness. Seeing his chance, Cal threw himself forward. His shoulders screamed as he connected with ornate plate armor, the impact sending jolts of pain down his arm. His opponent absorbed the charge, barely giving ground. Plated fingers clamped around Cal's arms, and using his own momentum against him, the Lord Inquisitor pivoted to fling Cal over his hip. The world upended as Cal spun, a sensation soon replaced by hard stone crashing into his back. Before Cal could get his bearings, an obsidian pommel smashed into his ribs, stealing what little remained of his breath. Each new gasp for air was greeted with a sharp pinch in his side, as if his lungs were punishing him for daring to breathe. He looked up just in time to see the underside of a boot before it crashed into his face with a wet crunch. Blood pooled in his nose and throat, choking him, forcing him to roll to his side, the blade shard clattering against the stone as he did.
Seems you're not quite the swordsman you thought, even with the gift afforded to you by the Dread.
The Lord Inquisitor sheathed his sword and stepped over Cal, a look of genuine disappointment on his face.
I expected more.
The heat in Cal's chest ebbed, replaced by the icy touch of hopelessness. The Lord Inquisitor knelt down and cradled Cal's head.
I take no pleasure in this, but together you will help me bring order back to this savage land. Help reunite a people who have strayed from their rightful place. We can do this together, as a family. Me, you, and your father.
Cal tried to pull away, but his body wouldn't respond. His fingers closed tighter around Ovette's coin pouch, a final act of defiance. His focus shifted to his friends as they engaged the other Inquisitors. He watched as brilliant white flames shot from Ovette's palms, as Shay struggled to dodge the deadly swings of her opponent, and as George screamed profanities at a grinning Quentin, Artie mewling in his grasp. The Lord Inquisitor followed Cal's gaze and sighed.
I understand. You care for them. You think they ground you. That they're your family.
He dropped Cal's head and stood.
It is my deepest hope that in time, things can be different between us. That you will come to see what is right for you, as I do now.
He pried the coin pouch from Cal's grip.
Such sentiment is a weakness, and weakness must be purged.
The Lord Inquisitor turned it over in his hand. Without warning, flames erupted from his palm, engulfing the ratty material and burning through the old cloth, the yellow bindings unlacing with the heat. The Lord Inquisitor then flicked the ash from his hand, and Cal felt his mind shatter. The chain's dark language roared in his skull, intensified by the Lord Inquisitor uttering the same black speech. The pit returned, swallowing him whole. Chains snapped and rattled in the shadows. He screamed as they coiled around his arms and chest, crushing him, trapping him. The final flicker of his awareness registered the blinding pain of white light erupting at Artie's feet, the cries of escape, and orders of chase being given. He felt the Lord Inquisitor's gentle grip on his shoulder, raising him to his feet. An impulse whispered in his mind.
Kill the gifted.
Oh no! Oh no! Oh no! It can't be, ladies and gentlemen. He cannot do it. We won't allow it. Callus, grandson of the Lord Inquisitor, son of his father, as all sons are sons of their fathers, has been wooed by the dark side, not through choices of his own, but through forces greater than himself. And he has been sent out to chase, to attack his friend, Ovet the Gifted. No! Well, I guess we find out what happens, right? But now we don't move to a new chapter. Not exactly. Instead, we move to Interlude 4, Shay. Between Artie shouting for everyone to cover their eyes and the bright flash of light that exploded at his feet, Shay barely reacted in time. One of the deathly Inquisitors had stood a few feet in front of her, his hulking, deformed silhouette blocking most of the flash. Still, her eyes stung, and the ringing in her ears threatened to drive her insane. Whatever Artie had done had been enough to disorient everyone except Cal. He stood, swaying back and forth, staring into the distance. She recoiled at the sight of thin black tendrils crawling across his face, just beneath his skin, the same veins she'd seen on his arm and chest. Before she could reach him, Ovette grabbed her wrist and pulled her out of the room. The artificial lights that hung on the walls seared Shay's vision as Ovette led her through the maze-like corridors, taking turns at random. When Ovette finally stopped, Shay scanned her surroundings but recognized nothing. Every hallway was identical. All the color had drained from Ovette's face. She stared back at the way they'd come, beads of sweat running down her cheeks, her hand clutching her chest as if something were gripping hold of her tight. "What happened back there?" Shay asked. She knew Ovette might not have the answers, but she needed to focus on something other than the rising panic that clawed at her insides. "The Flash. And Cal. We just left him." Ovette stared ahead, her breathing steadying faster than Shay would have expected. "There's nothing we can do for him now. We need to get out of the Citadel as soon as possible." The usual softness in her voice, the one others mistook for nervousness or weakness, was gone, replaced instead by steel that deepened the pit in Shay's stomach. "We need to find the others before we can get out of here. I'm not leaving Jord and Artie." Shay had confidence that Jord could get himself out, but Artie wasn't used to field operations. Sure, he'd been on a few supply runs, but nothing serious. Nothing without Cal there looking out for him. From the far end of the corridor, Shay heard the scrape of metal on stone. Through the dim light of the corridor's lanterns, she spied two of the deadly Inquisitors stalking toward them. Momentary shock hit Shay, and she planted herself closer to the wall, her back and hand pressed tight against the cold stone. She wondered how they'd been able to find them, but then it came to her. She cast an accusatory glance at Ovette, one that quickly melted into pity. No matter where Ovette ran, the Inquisitors and the Davins would always be able to find her. Her powers were less a blessing than they were a beacon. As if resigned to the very same thought, Ovette ignited white flames in her palm and drew her thin sword. Fire writhed across her skin like a living thing. the flames roaring in intensity, coming to the defense of their matron. The intense heat buffeted Shay, but she couldn't tear her gaze away from the flames. She'd seen Ovette command the gift a few times now, but to be up close next to it was another thing entirely. Whenever Shay summoned her shadows, she could feel the gift move through her, her body channeling its energies. But there was always a degree of separation, as if she were borrowing a power that never fully belonged to her. But Ovette and the gift were one. She wasn't channeling anything. It looked as though she were the gift made real. As impressive as she was, Shay couldn't help notice Ovette's awkward sword grip, her fingers just an inch too far away from the handguard, compensating for the sword's weight. It was obvious she'd had training, but possessed no natural talent for the blade. Shay stepped in front of her, dagger in one hand and a shadowy twin forming in the other. She passed both between her hands, a trick she'd used to confuse several opponents in the past. It had even worked on Cal once upon a time. I'll draw them in close, and you hit them from range. Got it? Shay didn't turn for confirmation. Ovette's momentary protest died in her throat, and the sound of her sheathing blade told Shay all she needed to know. The approaching Inquisitors broke into a sprint. Their bodies jerked and twitched like puppets on a string. Several times, they bumped and crashed into one another, their bulging limbs tangling for a moment, but neither crashed to the floor. Shay swore she could see parts of their torsos moving, reshaping under their armor. Fear crescendoed in her ears, that silent panic that edges the brave closer and closer to hysteria. Her knuckles whitened around her real dagger, and she willed herself to stand her ground. Rushing to meet them head on would put her at a disadvantage. She needed to wait for them to draw in closer, for them to feel as though they had the upper hand. That is, if they felt anything at all. Their bodies snapping to a halt, the Inquisitors ceased their charge. They stood shoulder to shoulder, swaying, grumbling, their breath closer to a wheezing hiss than the rhythmic exhale of a living being. Shay kept her stance low, coiled to strike the moment she needed to. Behind her, the heat from Ovette's flames faded, and the coldness of the Citadel's stone crept back across her skin. Shay dared a glance over her shoulder and saw Ovette staring down the opposite end of the corridor, her face drained of color. Shay followed her gaze. A lone figure shambled toward them. It walked with a heavy gait, the footsteps uneven and awkward as if weighed down by invisible restraints. Its head twitched in a similar fashion to the Inquisitor's, and every now and again it would stop before lurching forward once more. It shied away from the light, but not before Shay caught a glimpse of the shaggy, dark hair that framed its pale, stern face. Ichor ran cheek to chin from the corners of keen, bloodshot eyes. Shay had always felt like those eyes looked straight through her, cutting through the bullshit and laying bare the vulnerable girl underneath. But now they burned with a malice she hadn't thought them capable of. Malice focused solely on Ovette. Cal? Shay whispered, unable to summon her voice. Only mangled whispers responded, whispers in a language that crawled through her. Tendrils squirmed and shuddered under his skin. In a hand completely given over to the darkness, he held his broken blade, the leather wrappings of its hilt creaking under his grip. Ovette edged to the side, moving toward an opening that would lead them down another random corridor. Her gaze was locked onto Cal as if nothing else existed, her chest rising and falling in shallow bursts. Her fear had won, and Shay couldn't blame her. Cal stopped mid-stride and cried out in anguish, clawing at his temples. He arched his whole body backwards, his spine bending unnaturally far, the uncomfortable crack of bone echoing down the corridor. Through his agony, Shay was sure he spoke to her, a garbled speech that was caught somewhere between words and pain. She inched forward, straining to listen to what he was trying to say. He screamed again, louder this time, a visceral screech that sent a chill down Shay's spine. She flinched as he smashed his head against the wall. Again, and again, and again. Each impact left behind a splattering of blood and ichor. Every fiber of her being pleaded with her to flee, but she couldn't leave him. She wouldn't. "Cal?" she whispered again, now only a few feet away. Cal's jerking stopped. His head snapped in her direction, as if noticing her for the first time. "Shay," he growled through gritted teeth, his body shaking with effort. "Run!" The word devolved into an animalistic growl, and Cal lunged forward, his blade shard raised above his head. A plume of white-hot fire slammed into his chest, hurling him backward. Ovette grabbed Shay's wrist again and pulled her into the empty corridor. Shay's feet pounded on stone, tears stinging her eyes as she ran. Her fear had won. She covered her ears as Cal's pained screams echoed behind her. Shay tried in vain to master her fear as it leaped inside her. Adrenaline fueled her rapid steps as she raced through the halls of the Citadel, her thoughts filled with a jolt-ridden mess of panic and what-ifs. She struggled to keep up with Ovette's twists and turns, taking the hallway's corners seemingly at random. Behind them, not more than 100 paces or so, the source of Shay's fear wailed like a rabid animal. One thought in particular held dominion over the others. The image of the swirling mass of tendrils that writhed under Cal's skin, his face twisted and contorted as he struggled to remain in control. It fed her fear, her guilt. She failed him. She'd let him down. She was leaving him behind. Shay slowed to a stop, half to catch her breath, and half because she couldn't just run away. There had to be some way she could reach Cal, some way to get through to him. They'd stuck by each other ever since Igni, ever since she dragged him into this life of blood and rebellion. Marcus had told her that ill fortune haunted the guilty, and right now Shay believed it. She'd been the one to goad Cal into following her, the one to hand an angry teenager a sword and push him into the shadows. Sure, the Lord Inquisitor had kidnapped Ovette, but Shay had been the one to recruit him into the rebellion. Shay needed to help him. She owed it to him. Ill fortune be damned. Ovette spun around, her pale skin flushed red, her white hair plastered to her forehead. "What are you doing? We need to go! Now!" Spittle flew from her lips, and her wide eyes darted to the corridor behind her. Given the situation, it wasn't unusual that Ovette's voice was raised well above its usual measured volume, but it still took Shay by surprise. She'd seen her scream before in anger or frustration, and knew that despite her appearance, Ovette wasn't the goody-two-shoes everyone thought her to be. But some part, a big part, of Shay had hoped for calm, for Ovette to keep her head while her childhood friend, the only family she had left, hunted them like prey. "We can't just keep running," Shay replied, her lungs burning. They were both in panic mode. That much was clear, but with no goal in mind, their aimless running and panicking would get them both killed. If her thoughts failed her, then she would rely on her training. Think what she may of him, but Barkus had armed her with all the tools and skills she needed to stay alive, and this was no different. We need a plan. She forced the words out, breathless as she was. We can't run forever, and the more we do, the weaker we'll be when our luck runs out and Cal catches up. I have a plan, Ovette shouted, gripping Shay's arm and dragging her further down the corridor. Break the chain! Shay drew in a breath to answer, but Ovette cut her off, already knowing what she was going to say. Cal is being controlled by the chain, by the dread. If we destroy it, Cal might come back to us. Might? I don't know. But we need to get back to the chain room. It was obvious Ovette's fear mirrored Shay's, but her focus held. The turns they'd taken in the corridor hadn't been random. They'd been intentional. Every left turn had taken them on a path that circled back to the chain room. Ovette had made a choice, and despite her fear, she'd committed to it. How do we break the chain? Shay skipped the why. She had no way of knowing if doing so would bring her friend back. For all she knew, it could make things worse. But having a goal helped her focus, helped her training kick in. Besides, the Cal she knew would rather die than be puppeteered by a Daven, god or not. Cal's sword, Ovette sputtered, pushing her words out as fast as she could. It's made from the same material as the chains. The Lord Inquisitor has one just like it. So, we get his sword. Then what? Shay's mind raced. Disarming Cal would be nearly impossible. They'd sparred countless times over the years, matched blow for blow, having long given up on a need to keep score. Where Shay had speed, Cal had ferocity. Where she had mobility, he had adaptability. She, like many others in the rebellion, had mastered their gift for combat purposes and had once thought of this fact as a strength. But over time, after watching Cal cut down scores of giftlings, she'd come to agree with his point of view. They'd relied too much on their gift and not enough on their raw martial strengths. Cal had no such reliance. What most perceived as a weakness, Cal had turned into his greatest strength. He was tenacious and ruthless in a fight, and in truth, she could think of few deadlier opponents. And now, the dread had made him worse. Ovette didn't get the chance to answer. A pained, gargled scream tore through the corridor, like a wounded animal pulling against the teeth of a hunter's trap. Cal crashed into the wall at speed and bounced off, tumbling to the ground. He spasmed on the stone, his limbs cracking at awkward angles before he began dragging himself up, each erratic movement feeding the nausea coiling in Shay's gut. The corruption within him streaked down his face, dripping to the ground in globs of black ichor. Shay recoiled, horrified by what he'd become. But Ovette stepped forward, white flames once again igniting in her palms. Cal's wails quieted to moans and murmurs. His head jerked to the side with a sickening click, and then, without warning, he lunged with unnatural speed. Ovette flicked her wrist and hurled her fire. Cal bisected it in midair, the halves detonated against the walls behind him. He crashed into Ovette before she could summon another mote of flame, sending both of them sprawling to the ground. Shay rushed forward and smashed the heel of her boot into Cal's nose, sending him reeling backward. Not wasting a second, she dragged Ovette up by her arm and retreated a few steps away. Cal writhed on the ground, clutching his face as the tendrils beneath his skin wrenched bone and cartilage back into place. Shay took another step back from her friend, the sight and sound sickening her to her core, unbearable to watch. Cal scrambled to his feet and slashed at Shay, but she was ready this time. She threw herself into the path of his strike, grabbed him by the wrist, and threw him over her shoulder. He screamed again, more guttural this time, angrier. He attacked again, a wild and frenzied slash with his dagger, aimed at her midriff. She dodged this first telegraphed strike with ease, but not the second. Pain flared as Cal plunged his blade shard into her thigh. Serrated teeth caught in her flesh, and she screamed as he ripped the blade free. Her leg buckled as she tried to step back, toppling her to the floor, the back of her head hitting the stone with a thud. White bursts flared behind her eyes, and her vision tunneled, dark at the edges, blurry at the center. She had just enough sense to see Cal stepping over her, but not enough to stop him from striking at Ovette, his blades nicking her arms and face as she did her best to move back. Shay forced herself up, blood beading her lip as she bit back against the swimming nausea in her stomach. She laced both arms under Cal's shoulders, locked them in place, and held tight with as much strength as she could muster. His dagger wasn't long enough to connect with her shoulder, but the tip of his blade shard cut through her leathers as though they weren't there. It wasn't long before Shay felt a stream of blood trickling beneath her armor. "Ovette, do something!" she screamed, her left arm going numb. White flames roiling in her palm, Ovette grabbed hold of Cal's sword hand, and the air sizzled with the stench of burning flesh. His scream rang distant, otherworldly, as the blade shard clattered to the ground. Ovette grabbed at it, only for Cal to drive his knee into her face. She yelped, stumbling a few steps back, specks of blood covering her cheeks. Cal wrenched one arm free from Shay's grasp, passed his dagger over to his free hand, and pivoted. The short obsidian blade carved a shallow trench across Shay's stomach, just deep enough to shock her into letting him go. As he turned back toward Ovette, a ball of white flame thumped into his chest, launching him down the corridor. Shay sprinted after Ovette, each footfall sending fresh jolts of agony through her leg and stomach. Cal's movements replayed in her mind, his attack patterns. He'd fixated on Ovette and treated Shay as merely an obstacle. The thing controlling him wanted the Gyfted. "Ovette!" Shay called out, limping forward. "We need to." Before Shay could finish, Ovette reignited her white flames and pressed them to her stomach. Shock and pain seared Shay's skin, and for a moment she was tempted to push Ovette away. But the pain faded as her flesh knit back together, and the dull ache in her leg and shoulder ebbed. She took a step back and tested her shoulder as she spoke. "We can't outrun him. He's going to catch up to us sooner or later. We'll never make it back to the chain rooms with him dogging our heels." "What are you suggesting?" Ovette's eyes thinned as she tried to figure out Shay's thoughts, though her tone remained sharpened by panic. Despite all this, Ovette had held herself together well. Shay was impressed, but a regret for never taking the time to know Ovette pushed that aside. This also made what she was about to do all the more difficult. Shadows peeled from the nooks and crannies of the corridor. They crept toward Shay, rolling up her legs, covering her from head to toe. She flared her brand brighter, and her hair shifted from raven black to a luminescent white, her skin glowing with borrowed purity. Ovette's face fell as she stared back at her mirror image. "Shay, no!" "He doesn't want me," Shay said, her voice taking on the same dulcet tones as Ovette's. "He wants the Gyfted, and now he can have her." She turned away, cutting off any attempt at dissuasion, but also because she knew the likely outcome of this plan. The terror it brought her needed to remain hidden. "I'll draw him away from you. give you the time you need to get back to the chain room. She glanced back, allowing herself a moment of weakness, her throat dry and cracking even before she spoke. Bring him back, please. Ovette nodded with tear-filled eyes. She drew her thin sword and passed it to Shay, her fingers lingering on the hilt before she turned and took off down the corridor. Alone, Shay tilted her head to the ceiling, a futile attempt to quell the tears streaming beneath the illusion. Time seemed to slow as she stared into the darkness above her, slow enough for her to react on her failures. She had no idea if Jord and Artie were still alive. She'd been blinded to Quentin's betrayal, despite being warned again and again by Cal. She'd been stubborn, headstrong, and arrogant to the point where she thought she could lead, to inspire those around her to do what she thought was right, what she thought was just. Ill fortune indeed. Guilty indeed. She took a deep breath, and when she dropped her head, Cal stood before her. His leathers bore a hole from Ovette's gift fire. A fresh, newly healed burn scar mottled the skin on his chest. Shay stared at him for a long while, stared at the only person she'd ever let close. The outcome of this fight wasn't in doubt. It would cost them both. I know you're in there still somewhere, Cal. The words were more for herself than the snarling thing before her. I don't know of any other way to help you. I'm sorry. Cal's neck cracked. He stepped forward, his malice falling off of him in waves, growling, snarling. Shay readied Ovette's blade. One final breath. Then she charged at her fate. Cal's dagger whipped through the air with violent speed. Shay's illusion held, but each passing second strained her concentration. It was only a matter of time until that concentration slipped, and then so too would her illusion. She reminded herself that her job wasn't to stop Cal, but to slow him down. A small comfort. His movements were a blur, quickened by the dark entity that puppeteered his body. At first, Shay tried to keep up with his strikes, parrying and dodging. She fell back on the insight she'd gleaned from the many sparring sessions they'd shared over the years. Outright blocking Cal's strikes had always been pointless. The moment they locked blades, he'd go for her knee with the heel of his boot or attempt to throw his head forward. The sheer aggression had terrified her, but over time, she'd come to see it for what it was. Cal was so blinded by his need to overpower and dominate his opponent that he left himself open. One such attempt flew at Shay with alarming speed. Cal thrust forward with his dagger, goading Shay into a parry. She obliged and slapped the tip of his dagger away. As expected, Cal turned his body into the deflection and threw out a wild punch. Shay dipped low, flipping her borrowed sword over in her hand, and drove the pommel into his jaw. The rounded metal thumped into bone with a crack, and Cal teetered on his heels. Seeing her prediction come true renewed her confidence somewhat. Unperturbed by the strike or the bruise blossoming on his chin, Cal threw himself at Shay, his strikes wilder than before. Shay breathed through each movement, trusting her muscle memory to parry and pivot to keep Cal at bay. She played her part in this dance well, but she knew that it was only a matter of time before Cal actually did overpower her. His strikes were not only faster, but stronger, a strength that he didn't normally possess. Every successful parry sent shockwaves of fatigue up her arms. Either she ended this fight now, or Cal would end her. She parried the latest strike, forced the dagger downward, and then looped her blade point over Cal's meager guard and stabbed deep into the meat of his arm. Cal howled with the same eerie, distant voice, but managed to keep a firm grip on his dagger. When Shay tried to pull her point back, he grabbed hold of her blade with his free hand. Blood slicked along the blade's edge as he yanked her forward and drove his elbow into her throat. Shay coughed and spluttered, doubling over as she tried to maintain her breathing and her balance. Cal seized her by the throat and slammed her into the wall. She kicked with what little strength she had left, her feet connecting with his thigh and stomach. Her lungs burned. Her back ached. But the pain in her gut came later, unnoticed until Cal twisted the dagger he'd buried in her flank, driving it up deeper. Panic set in as Shay looked down at his bloodied fist pressed hard against her, the dagger's hilt too close to her skin. He released his grip on her throat, and they both dropped to the ground. Blood bubbled out of Shay's mouth, pooled in the bottom of her throat. Cold crept through her fingers, spreading up her hands and arms. The illusion flickered, her strength all but diminished. Cal's grimace softened as she looked up. The dark cloud over his eyes receded like ink in water. Cal? Her words wavered as she cupped his face. The black tendrils that had swarmed and writhed beneath his skin stilled, and color began to creep into his features once more. Shay? His gaze wandered over her face for a moment, half focused like coming out of a dream, before his head lolled forward and his shoulders drooped. Welcome back, Shay croaked, forcing herself to smile. Back? Cal lifted his head and leaned back, his eyes falling to the dagger in her side. Ice pushed up her arm as he gripped her fingers tight, the realization of what he'd done snapping him out of his stupor. Shay? You had us worried. Shay coughed, trying and failing to keep her tone light. Cal laced his trembling fingers around the hilt of the dagger, braced his other hand against her shoulder, and withdrew the blade as gently as he could. Blood seeped through his fingers as he pressed his hand against the wound. A strange emptiness began to yawn in Shay's gut. Shay, what happened? I don't remember. Cal's word came in spluttered bursts of panic. Tears welled in his eyes, and there was little he could do to hold back the flood. Shay, I'm sorry, I didn't. I couldn't. Shay pressed her bloodied hand into his cheek. Shh. I know. It's okay. I need to get you out of here, Cal said, looping his arms under her shoulders. No. No, don't, she pleaded, pushing him back in a futile attempt at freeing herself. The others. Ovette. She needs you. She's gone back to the chain. Each word fought against the dry emptiness of her lungs. No, I'm not going anywhere, Cal barked. I'm not leaving you here. Yes, you are, she whispered. It was her turn to try to hold back the flood of tears. Her turn to try and fail. Promise me, Artie, Jord. Unwelcome heat blazed in her chest, and she coughed up a spray of blood. She heaved through each breath, fighting to stay just a little bit longer. Promise me. I promise, Cal blurted out, wearing his shame and panic as openly as his doubt. With numb fingers, Shay pawed at the hilt of Ovette's blade. The simple act of lifting it drained her and made the ice in her veins travel a little further. Go, Shay said, her words barely above a whisper, but lacking no conviction. She needs you. She smiled a weak smile and used what little she had left to press Cal's forehead against hers. I'll see you on the other side, handsome. Cal squeezed the back of her neck in response. Shaking, he drew back, picked up Ovette's blade and his discarded dagger, and started off down the corridor. Alone, Shay leaned her head back against the wall, the throbbing of her stomach the only thing that remained, the only thing that kept her there. Ill fortune follows the guilty. The lesson her father had taught her years ago. A lesson of responsibility, of shame, and how to make peace with what he'd called necessary evils. Ever her instructor, never her father. She'd taken the lives of more people than she dared to keep track of, split apart families and friends, all in the name of freedom. She was as guilty as those she deemed monsters. She deserved this end. Her thoughts drifted to Artie and Jord. Worry flared in her chest, and her breathing quickened with the last dregs of her panic. Even now, she forced herself to think of something to help them, some way that she could aid in their escape, some way to keep them safe. She drew her bloodied hand away from her stomach and let it rest on the floor. She was tired. So tired. Her breathing slowed. She had nothing left to give. She had to trust that they would get themselves out, trust that they would look after each other. Jord was brave, and Artie was cunning. They would be okay, she told herself. Her breath came shallow and slow, each with labored effort. Shay closed her eyes. It was time to let go. Shay! Oh no, everyone. Shay is gone. We have lost her. It is not okay. Why all these authors got to be killing people? The main people, why they got to be killing them? No. It's a good ending. Well written. But damn, why they got to be like that? Guys, make it okay. I don't think we can make it okay. And that, in itself, is okay. Sometimes to move the story forward, someone has to be left behind. But now, let's find out what happens on the other side, shall we? Let's find out what happens in Interlude 5. Jord. Out of breath and full of panic, Jord spun as he ran, his blade rising just in time to block a killing strike. The impact sent him reeling, and his clumsy counterthrust was knocked away with little effort. The chasing Inquisitor slashed at his leg, cutting a deep swath of crimson. Jord yowled, stumbling back on unsteady feet. The Inquisitor made his move, dropping low and pouncing on Jord, blade angled downward. Jord's sword vibrated in his hand. He opened his fingers, and the blade shot forward, sinking into his attacker's chest. Jord glanced back at Artie, faint green wisps curling from his fingertips. "Thanks, Artie," he huffed, struggling to get the words out through his throbbing leg pain. "Don't mention it." Pulling himself up with a groan, Jord limped over and clasped his companion on the shoulder, equal parts gratitude and the need for balance.
We need to go,
Jord said, eyeing the rising Inquisitor.
Any chance you know where we're going?
Artie stared at their enemy for a second, eyes wide with fear and fascination all at once.
According to my estimates, we should be nearing some form of loading bay or dock. A facility such as this would likely need several.
Jord spun him around, cutting him off as he pushed him forward. Now wasn't the time for Artie's typical long-winded speeches. They needed to find a way out of this maze as soon as possible. Jord had no idea where the others were, had no idea if they were safe, or even alive. They'd all fled in separate directions after the chain room. A terrible idea in hindsight. Getting to the chain room itself had proven to be difficult. The corridors of the citadel were designed to confuse and disorient intruders. Not only that, their meager team was outnumbered and outmatched by the Lord Inquisitor and his ilk. Cal and Ovette could hold their own against the Inquisitors. Likely Shay, too, if she were pushed to her limit. And though he may be counted among the potent, his swordplay left much to be desired. And then there was Artie. As if reading his thoughts, Artie asked, "Oh, what about Cal and the others? We're leaving without them." Jord answered through gritted teeth, the pain in his leg pulsing with every step. "No choice, Artie. But we plan to return, correct?" Jord stayed silent. He feared telling Artie the truth would slow him down or cause him to become even more unraveled than he already was. It was likely that either it was unlikely that either of them would see Cal or Shay again. They knew the dangers of assaulting an enemy's stronghold as much as he did. Jord? Artie pressed. Let's focus on getting out of here. Then we can plan for the future. Jord hated not telling him the truth, but bad situations sometimes called for bad answers. And right now, that was the best Jord could offer. Whether by luck or Artie's intellect, they rounded a corner and passed through a door into a cavernous storeroom. Stacked metal crates formed a series of labyrinthine pathways with a central aisle that ran toward a distant wall where wind howled through an open bay. "There!" Artie proclaimed, rushing into the aisle and pointing at a small cargo skiff tethered by a chain. "Do you know how to control one of those?" Jord asked, limping behind, blood soaking his trouser leg. "No," Artie shouted back, "but I believe the currents generated by the gale outside should provide me with enough time to—" "All right, I get it," Jord snapped, seething against the pain in his leg. His wound burned with every shift of weight. "Just do what you need to do, what you can." Jord was no medical expert, but it was obvious even to him that the Inquisitor had struck a vital artery. An injury that sat between fatal and survivable, depending on his immediate actions. Voices echoed from the corridor behind them. Jord dove to the side of the winding metal pathways and risked a glance at the storeroom's entrance. Two Inquisitors stalked into the room, one with a fresh bloodied opening in his armor. Behind them, Quentin followed, casting his gaze among the metal stacks with a triumphant grin. "Jord!" he called out, his sing-song voice dripping with mockery. With a hand over the opening in his leg, Jord crept forward, leaning on the crates for support. Ahead, Artie had dropped low near the skiff, though from fear or practicality, Jord had no idea. But he was thankful for the lad's instinct nonetheless. That was until Artie produced a small silver ball pockmarked with holes from his satchel. Jord stifled a shout and nearly toppled while waving to get Artie's attention. "Lover, you're bleeding. Are you hurt?" Quentin's voice echoed off the metal stacks, making it difficult to pinpoint exactly where he was. "Come, let me nurse you back to health. I promise I'll be gentle." Jord bit his lip. He'd left a trail of blood in his wake, so hiding was pointless. Jord knew that. Quentin knew that. Quentin wasn't trying to find him. He didn't have to. All he had to do was wait until Jord didn't have the strength to fight back. "If you come out now, I promise I won't hurt jittery Artie. Ask Shay if you don't believe me." Another glance revealed two additional Inquisitors, dragging a limp Shay between them, her blood smearing the floor. "She's not looking so good, lover." Jord pressed the back of his head against the stack and cursed. His chances of leaving this room grew slimmer by the second, but he might still be able to get Artie and Shay out. Bringing his breathing down to a calmer rhythm, he limped into clear view, hands in the air.
What do you want?
He snapped. Quentin's predatory grin split his features in half. Why, you, of course. You're all I've ever wanted.
Save it, Jord bit back. Just tell me what you need and let the others go.
He shuffled forward, eyes flicking to Shay. Poor Shay. Quentin tilted up her limp head with his thumb and forefinger, moving it from side to side in a mock inspection. Her eyelids fluttered as Quentin turned her pale face toward Jord. I doubt she'll make it. At least not without immediate medical attention. His smile dropped. He didn't need it. The threat didn't need embellishment.
Bastard,
Jord gritted through his teeth. Quentin dropped Shay's head and threw his own back in laughter. Believe me, I've been called worse. Much worse.
Like traitor?
Jord spat. Traitor? Quentin pressed a hand to his chest. My loyalties have never wavered. Not for a second. I would never. Oh, he laughed again. You mean a traitor to you? George's anger burned like coals in his throat. His body shook as he tried to maintain his balance. Nothing he could think to say would do justice to how much he despised Quentin in that moment. Even his many years of tutelage and study left him wanting when it came to describing how much he wanted to tear the smug smile from Quentin's face. He could only glare and seethe. You've no idea how long I've waited to put you and your friends in your place. Dirty little rats, the lot of you, always scurrying and scheming, holding on by a thread and following that piece of hollow-born filth as he murdered his way across the continent. Quentin's mirth curdled into utter contempt. You sicken me. You're not worth our empire's mercy.
Our empire?
Finally caught on, have you? I've spent years by your side, and all you ever did was whine and complain about how things should be different. All that time, and you never once suspected your bedmate was one of the oh so mean Davids. Pathetic. George's jaw trembled, the taste of copper flooding his mouth as he bit the inside of his cheek.
What do you want?
Isn't it obvious? I want you. All of you. Quentin said, stepping forward and eyeing the puddle of blood just beneath George's dripping leg. The Lord Inquisitor wants the information in that pretty little head of yours. The location of the other rebel cells. How organized you all are. Everything. George clocked Quentin's interest in his leg. He braced himself and exaggerated a wince as he leaned into the wound, hoping to sell his uneven balance.
We have your word we won't be harmed?
No more than you already are. Quentin stepped closer, his shit-eating grin returning. Who knows? I might even treat you myself, for old time's sake. Quentin was close, enough for his scent to wrap around Jord. Subtle sandalwood and dark roast. Not long ago, Jord would have given anything to smell that aroma once more. Their parting had hurt him more than he cared to admit to others, and some stubborn part of him clung to the idea that their love hadn't been entirely false. Swallowing hard against the lump in his throat, Jord pushed his doubt to his stomach. He stared his former lover dead in the eye and willed his gift into the palm of his hand. Heat flickered against his skin, and in an instant he leveled his hand and shunted the bright orange gift fire into Quentin's armored chest. The blast flung them apart. Quentin crashed into the Inquisitors behind him, and Jord collided with the nearest metal stack, gasping as the wind was knocked out of him. He had just enough wherewithal to cough and splutter. "Artie, now!" A metallic ping and bright white light filled the room. George shielded his eyes, but the resulting glare from the flash of light still burned at the edges of his vision. Artie rushed forward and attempted to pick Jord up. "Get Shay," he sputtered, waving Artie off. "Get to the cargo skiff." Thankfully, Artie did as he was told and hauled Shay to her feet. Whether she was alive or dead didn't matter. Jord refused to leave her behind. The muscles in his leg blazed as he forced himself up. He braced his one arm against the crates and hobbled after a struggling Artie. Where would they run? What had become of the rebels assaulting the town hall? Was there any chance they were still alive? Doubt flooded his thoughts. The rebellion had come close to destruction plenty of times in the past, but they'd always resurfaced. Somehow. This time felt different. Final. Pain slashed across his back, waist to shoulder, and his leg buckled underneath him.
"Where do you think you're going?"
Quentin hauled him up by the hair, voice stripped of its usual charm. Dizziness swam through Jord, and it was all he could do not to throw up. Artie yelled in panic a few paces away from the cargo skiff, but his words were lost to the ringing in Jord's ears.
"Stay right where you are, Artie,"
Quentin yelled, spitting his rage all over Jord's cheek.
"Drop Shay or I'll open his throat."
Artie froze, and Shay slumped to the ground. Her eyes flickered open, meeting Jord's. Wincing, she held her side and pushed herself up on her elbow. Quentin's blade bit into Jord's skin as he squirmed. He stared at a half-conscious Shay, pouring all his thoughts and plans into that look, praying that she understood.
"Artie," Quentin ordered, "step away from the skiff."
Artie flinched, but did as he was told. He looped his arms under Shay's and helped her to her feet. Jord watched and waited until they were a few paces to the side of the cargo skiff, just off to the edge.
"Good. Now."
Jord flared his brand before Quentin finished, poured the last of himself into his palm. Feeling the cold drain on his body, he stretched out his hand and sent a ball of gift fire into the cargo skiff's exposed engine. Steel sawed across his throat, and blood gushed over his clutching fingers as he threw up his hands to the open wound. He fell forward as heat from the engine's explosion washed over him, Shay tackling Artie over the lip of the landing pad. The last thing he saw. The blast ignited the contents of the closest crate. Jord didn't care. His work was done. All right, well, now I'm confused. Who's dying? Shay clearly didn't die. Not yet, at least. Did Jord just die? Was his throat cut and the explosion killed him? Are Artie and Shay going to live jumping into the water? Find out next week on our next episode of Oprah's Interlude, the story of a new generation. Okay, well, so we're not going to do that. We're going to read it now. As it should be, so shall it be written, so shall it be done. It was written, we will read it. But I thought for sure Shay was gone, and that was going to be the end of her, and then she came into Interlude 5. And now Jord, at the end of Interlude 5, has blown up an engine and possibly had his throat cut. Shall we find out more in our next chapter? As we dive into Interlude 6, Ovette. Ovette stared up at the chain, her breath coming in burning rasps. What she had to do next was going to hurt. A lot. And she wasn't even sure it was going to work. She willed the gift to her and reached out toward the chain, baiting the dread. Nothing. The enormous links in the chain were still. Even the carved sigils and glyphs were silent. No evidence of life or sentience. Come on! Ovette screamed, slamming her fist against the obsidian material. I'm here! Take me! Pressure thudded against her temples. The voices in her head screamed in concert with her own, telling her what to do next, what her purpose was, who she was to save, how she was about to die. Shut up! She screamed, directing her frustration to the presence she felt beside her, hands aching from pounding the unyielding chain. The voices fell silent, or as silent as they could be, dulled from a cacophony of noise to a dull hum. This gave her room to think, room to breathe. Ovette raised Cal's broken blade. Much like the chain, the material absorbed the light in the room rather than reflecting it. Her arm shook as she held it forward. The hilt was heavier than what remained of the blade. She thought back to her blade work lessons with the Lord Inquisitor, how he'd insisted that she learn to defend herself without the gift. She'd studied and practiced with a variety of weapons before finding her preference. And although Cal's blade was shorter than what she was used to, the offset balance made it awkward to handle. This shard was hardly a weapon at all. For a moment, she wondered how Cal was able to accept such a disadvantage. But she quickly pushed the thought aside. Cal had always been at a disadvantage, and yet he threw himself into danger without ever thinking about himself. It was one of the things that made him who he was. Reckless. Brave. Her stomach lurched as something snapped tight against her chest, and white-hot agony ran through her as an ethereal chain yanked itself taut. The room shook as the runes etched into the chain's links flared to life. Painful memories of Igni and Yundis filled her. Old memories of loss and fresher memories of purpose that were now tinged with betrayal. Bearing the pain as best she could, Ovette swung the blade shard of the chain, throwing herself into the strike. The blade bounced off, leaving no scratch, no mark, or any indication that it had connected with the godly metal. The ethereal chain in her chest pulsed with a fresh wave of heat, and she fell to her knees, her essence draining through the ghost-like links. She scrambled forward and hacked at it again and again. There was no form or method to her strikes. She struck hard with both hands on the hilt, thrust as if the blade shard were a fencing tool, and even flipped the weapon around and stabbed in a wild frenzy. But it made no difference. For her, like so many other Udens who had tried the same, the chain was unyielding to her assault. No! Please! She collapsed to her knees, her body screaming in pain. Ovette? Cal's voice came from behind her. The panic in her stomach flared. She tried to bring up the blade shard to defend herself, but her limbs refused to respond. Cal stepped closer, his gait strange, hesitant almost. Ovette, he said again, his voice wavering as if on the brink of collapse. Ovette noted the lack of corruption in his eyes as he drew closer, the redness in his cheeks, and the trail of tears. Shay, is she? She croaked. Cal turned his head away. Ovette didn't push further. She didn't have to. In a sickening sort of way, this made sense to her. The chain hadn't wanted anything to do with her when she'd first arrived in the room. Not until it knew it was the real her. With renewed effort, she held his blade shard out to him, arms shaking. The voices in her head whispered, trying their best to comfort her and divert some of the pain away. Cal took the blade without meeting her gaze, his blackened fingers loose around the hilt. It didn't take long for what remained of the fire within him to ignite and for the hilt's leather wrapping to crack under his grip. Gift flared and the stench of burning flesh filled the room as Cal seized the ethereal chain. His arms shook against the effort, but no cry escaped him. The voices in Ovette's head grew excited with the anticipation of release. In one deft movement, Cal sliced through the ethereal chain and coiled the remains around his forearm, pulling it tight as the entity controlling it squirmed for release. Ovette reeled backward, hitting the floor hard. She looked up just in time to see Cal drive his blade shard into the closest link of the giant chain. The smell of searing flesh intensified, assailing her senses, too potent to ignore. Cal's scream tore through the chamber. He twisted his body against the hilt and slammed his free hand down onto the other as he pushed. Ovette scrambled and pressed her hands to his back, channeling her gift into him. With a final cry, Cal wrenched the blade through the chain, stumbling as the shard was cleaved free. For a moment, the air stilled, the now two halves of the chain hanging in the air, as if suspended, frozen. Cal's heavy breathing the only sound to fill the silence. Then, with a concussive blast that catapulted them both across the room, Gift exploded out of the chain. Ovette rolled along the hard stone floor, pain erupting in her shoulders and elbows. Cal, on the other hand, smashed into the far wall with a hard, sickening crunch before collapsing. The room fractured as the severed chain whipped and lashed like a dying beast, colliding with the walls and ceiling. Chunks of rock rained down as Ovette pulled herself over to Cal. He held the remnants of his sword in his hand, the blade shattered and broken, only the hilt remaining, his fingers slack. "Cal, get up!" She clutched at his body, not daring to risk further injury by moving him too much. "Please, get up! We need to go!" She placed her ear to his chest, but heard nothing save the thunder of falling stone around her. No wisp of breath, no murmuring heartbeat. Nothing. Ovette beat her bloodied and bruised hands against his chest as the world shook itself loose behind her. Then she stilled, cold realization halting the well of tears behind her eyes. The chain was broken. The job was done. Perhaps it was better if they both perished here. She wouldn't have to be the gifted anymore, and he wouldn't have to. The voices in her head shrieked with intensity, and she clawed at her temples in a futile effort to lessen the pain. "You need to leave," a young voice said from beside her. The pain in her skull abated. Ovette opened her eyes to a blur of dust and stone. And there, amidst the rubble of it, as if unperturbed by the chaos around him, stood Roskell, looking the same as the last time she'd seen him alive. Ash and sweat streaked across his face, his dirty clothing frayed at the edges by fire and overuse, a large red stain darkening his tunic. "No, not now. Please leave me alone," she sobbed, burying her head into Cal's chest. "Death is not your fate. Not today, Gyfted. Come." Roskell's voice echoed as if spoken from far away. "What about him?" she asked. In the time it took for her to lift her head again, Roskell had moved from her side to the chain room's entranceway. "Come, we will lead you." Ovette sniffed, smeared the tears away from her cheek, and then hauled Cal to his feet. He was heavier than she would have expected, his weight straining her already screaming knees. "Come," Roscoe repeated, staring back at her with pupilless eyes that conveyed no sense of emotion, care, or the boy that had once been. Ovette huffed against the strands of hair that obscured her vision. The corridors shook less than the chain room, the tremors milder than the room's death throes, or whatever counted as death throes for a god-possessed structure. Cal's full weight pressed against her shoulder, his feet flopping as she tried her best to move with urgency. More than once, the shaking of the citadel threatened to topple them both, but she pushed against the lingering ache in her body. She would get him out, both of them, even if it meant she had to follow the dreamer. Even now, years after her gift first manifested, Ovette didn't fully understand what the dreamer was. In many ways, it reminded her of the dread, but its energies felt less intense, more distant, muted almost. It was a presence she'd always felt, ever since she was young. The headaches, the constant feeling of being watched, the voices that whispered to her as she'd stared up at Igny's chain. Her gift had given her more than just power or duty. It had opened the gateway for the dreamer to communicate with her, to guide her on her journey to becoming the gifted. Keep up, lass, called another familiar tone, this one older and matronly. Ovette had never gotten used to seeing the faces of those she'd lost. It was the dreamer's way of making divine counsel easier. These borrowed faces were meant to act as a buffer, a familiar presence that cushioned bad news, for that's all the dreamer had ever offered her. You don't want to be buried in this place. It's not your time to be given up. You've got plenty left to do. The muscles in her neck protested as Ovette lifted her head. The dreamer had shed Roscoe's form and was now wearing the likeness of Lady Havisham. Ovette gave in to the ache in her neck and adjusted Cal's arm over her shoulder, taking a fresh hold of his leather jerkin. By the time she looked again, the form of Lady Havisham had vanished. On wobbly knees, Ovette dragged Cal into an antechamber. It was a large room, with a ceiling that stretched higher than necessary, and a set of distant doors. Another tremor caused a crack to rend its way from floor to ceiling, causing boulder-sized sections of the ceiling to rain down. Ovette threw her weight into Cal, knocking them both out of the path of danger just in time. She coughed against the dust clogging her throat, adrenaline warring with approaching nausea. Beside her, Cal lay motionless with one arm slumped over himself. Blood pooled beneath a gash across his forehead. Several smaller pieces of debris lay scattered around him. Ovette felt the will to move, the will to continue on and persevere, like she always had. But her body was spent. Her ruined clothes clung to a patch of sticky, dark crimson. Her nausea intensified with the shaking of the citadel, and her vision passed in and out of a blur.
Are you giving up?
The sound of another familiar voice, one she hadn't heard the dreamer use before, caught her attention. She shifted her head and blinked through the blur, forcing her eyes to focus on a pair of well-tailored leather boots that had appeared before her. Shock cut through the nausea as fresh tears began to roll down her cheeks. Jord, no, she whispered, finding the strength to bring herself to her knees and throw her arms around him. His form was cold to the touch and altogether unsolid. Empty, like a shell. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't see this coming.
Why are you sorry? He is with us now. It was his time.
George's cold hands pushed her back and held her at a distance, his voice echoing from some hollow chamber within his chest.
But it is not your time. You still have much to do, Gifted.
Stop calling me that, Ovette blurted out, the words spurred on by desperate primal frustration. I never wanted to be that. The form of George stood silent as the room continued to tremble. Finally, George's hollow voice echoed through his shell once more.
Are you giving up?
Ovette breathed hard, tore her gaze away from Jord, and looked at Cal. Help him.
I.
No, help him.
He is beyond our reach. If we aid him, it will know.
I don't care. Ovette glared at Jord's form and felt the resistance in the dreamer's gift as she drew it into herself. Let the dread come. Silence again. The resistance in the gift held for a heartbeat longer before the flow eased into her once more.
As you wish.
Power flooded her veins. She took a long, deep breath, gasping as though she were a drowning woman breaching the surface of icy waters. She stumbled over to Cal, dropped to her knees, and poured all that she had into him. The dread's corruption writhed and pushed against his skin, his features contorted with pain. A small rivulet of blood trickled out from his clenched teeth. Hauling him to his feet once more, Ovette trudged a path around and between the fallen pieces of debris and made her way toward the doors on the other side of the room.
Do you even realize what you've done?
The Lord Inquisitor's bellow cut through the din of the room.
Any idea of what you have unleashed?
He stood across the room from her, his hands gripping the doorway tight. The contours of his armor were splattered with blood and dust. His normally pristine white hair was frazzled with panic, and his eyes were wide with terror.
The dread will not stop until it has consumed everything Eudos has to offer. You and that whelp have doomed us all.
Ovette opened her mouth to respond, but a timely groan from Cal gave her pause. She passed her gaze between him and the Lord Inquisitor before deciding to leave her former mentor with his god. Okay, so now we know Jord died because he came in the form of the Dreamer. But I would say Shay is probably going to survive. I would say Artie is going to survive. And I would imagine Ovette and Cal are going to survive. Is it bad for me to say I'm okay with Jord having gone? Mainly because when I picked his voice at the very beginning of the book, now bear in mind, I don't normally read these books before I actually read into them with you guys. I like to be surprised and shocked and awed and all of those things right alongside you guys. So, for example, when Shay appeared dead, I felt that Shay was dead. If I'd read the book before, I wouldn't have been able to have that reaction. And I think it's nice for me to to be able to do that along with you guys. But because of that, I'd read the first chapter or two of the book just so I could get a sense of the writing, the pacing, the things like that before I start reading. I gave Jord his voice figuring that he was just going to be a youthful antagonist and we would move on. And then he became a main character, and I hated the voice I had given him. Now I don't have to do the voice anymore. I suppose I can take that. Ah, the life of a voice artist, right? You gotta love what you do. All right, guys. We've got at least another chapter or two in us. Let me see about how much is. Yeah, we're not going to get through the book today, but we'll get through at least another chapter or two. How's that? So, unless any of you guys have any thoughts, questions, comments, or concerns, let's dive into our next chapter. 31. Cal. Everything ached. Cal could feel the grind of his joints as he tried to move his arms and legs. They felt stiff. unused. He lay on soft blankets with something hard underneath. A bed. An old bed. The frame creaked beneath him as he tried and failed to sit up. The smell of ash-cracked wood and moth-eaten sheets filled his nose. The details of the room swam into place as he blinked open his eyes. A damp cloth pressed against his forehead, the cool water trickling down his skin, a welcome sensation against the ambient heat of the room. A familiar heat, one he'd forgotten. Welcome back, Cal. A breeze carried the scent of smelt and iron through a gaping hole in the wall. The clang of hammers on steel echoed from somewhere below. There was a rawness in his chest, not from pain or muscle ache, but a sudden sense of longing for a place he'd never thought he'd return to. Igni. Try not to move so quickly, the voice said. Familiar, full of light and warmth. Someone who cared about him. Someone he cared about. You've been gone a while. The damp cloth dabbed against his cheek and the side of his throat. Do you want to get up? "Y- Yeah. He let gentle hands guide him upright. Movement felt good. Life flooded back into him as he bent limbs and flexed fingers. His eyes traced the hand on his chest, following the streaks of ivory white that arced like lightning through the skin. Up a slender arm to shoulders that cradled messy strands of stark white hair. The ends frizzled in the heat. Piercing blue eyes traced the outline of his figure, giving him a once-over, though Cal suspected this wasn't the first time she'd attended to him. "Oh, Vet," he said, his voice coarse. "You're okay." She chuckled, enough to break her concentration. "Yes, Cal, I'm fine." "We're in Igni?" "Yes," she replied, staring off to the side. "We're home." Recognition set in as he took in the room. A table with blackened edges sat in the middle of a small space, surrounded by several mismatched cushions and pillows, many of them blackened and crusted. Metal scraps shone with a dull glint through holes in a straw-hewn sack. And through the broken wall, Igni's breath stood tall and proud, its mouth alive with the deep glow of molten orange. Signs of destruction pockmarked what remained of the walls. But despite this, the familiar bric-a-brac around him and even the sight of Igni's breath further kindled warmth in his chest. At least, until he moved his gaze beyond the volcano. Until he saw them. Chains, some thick and monstrous, others thinner but no less imposing. Dozens of them speared the earth and vanished into the clouds above. Panic pushed Cal out of bed. His neglected muscles toppled him to the floor, but he crawled and struggled to the doorway, to the door that led out into the outer walkway. The new chains dominated every direction, close enough to cast a glow on the outer walls of the city, and far enough away to be partially obscured by distance. And on each of them, cliffs flared with constant presence. Vibrant, aggressive. They started appearing not long after we left Valewind. Ovette joined him on the walkway. Honestly, it's pure luck we even made it out of there in one piece. She placed her hand on the small of his back to help him maintain his shaky balance. When he turned to her, hoping she'd have answers for him, she only smiled. You're a lot heavier than you look. Jord? Artie? Have you seen them? Talk to them? The questions fired out of him one after the other, each with answers he already knew. Ovette dipped her head, her smile fading away. It was obvious. They weren't here. Shay's face flashed through his mind. It reopened a wound that being asleep had allowed him to forget. His hands trembled as he slid the dagger. His dagger out of her stomach. Her smile as she told him everything was going to be okay. He gasped for breath, the weakness in his chest tying itself into a knot. His body didn't have the strength to weep, but the tears burned behind his eyes all the same. He allowed Ovette to lead him back inside, sat still as she took the damp cloth and wiped away the soot that had collected across his cheeks and torso. A vain effort, with the city next to a volcano, but he appreciated the effort. She gestured to a set of clothes in the corner. They're clean, or as clean as I could get them. Thanks, Cal gulped in response. He swallowed against the lump in his throat, and, for the first time since he'd awoken, he noted the groan in his empty stomach. Ovette must have noticed it too. Get dressed, and we'll go get something to eat. I've done what I can for your body, but some food will do you a world of good. Besides, I need to check on Leif. Leif? His head throbbed with sudden alertness. He'd have pushed himself off the bed again, but a sudden surge of dizziness kept him seated. He's here? It took Ovette a moment to respond, but her smile returned. He's at the orphanage, or what's left of it. Bogdan was looking after him for a time, but since we're back. She trailed off and turned away from him, but not before he caught the glimmer in her eye. He'll be pleased to see you. Wait, Cal said, grabbing her wrist. How long was I? He gestured with his head toward the bed. Ovette sighed before turning to answer. 6 months. Her tone was flat and devoid of emotion. 6 months? Get dressed, Cal. We need to go see Leif. Dressing took more effort than he would have liked to admit. His joints protested, and his mind reeled at the thought of half a year lost. The corruption that had marred his skin for so long had now faded to dull scars. It didn't writhe under the surface anymore, though the discoloration of his skin remained. It would seem the dread no longer had a use for him. Unwanted and forgotten. Now he truly felt like he was home. Cal's dagger and the hilt of Leif's shattered sword lay beneath the final item of clothing. He reached out for the hilt, the blade little more than a single sliver of metal. Ovette stayed silent as he stared at the fragments. He couldn't decide if their ruined state was some cosmic joke about how his actions had led him here. How every choice he'd made had chipped away some part of him, until all that remained was this single sliver, desperately trying to hold on to what it used to be. With a heavy sigh, he turned away. He wasn't in the mood for jokes. It took a while, but with the aid of Ovette, Cal stepped out into the embers once more. The red and white clay buildings of his youth stood in ruins. Hardened rock crusted their walls, which had been outright replaced in some areas, the streets pockmarked with volcanic scars. The embers had never been beautiful, just a collection of run-down buildings that had more stain than infrastructure to them. But seeing it like this now wounded him deeper than he had expected. This was his home, destroyed and left to fend for itself. Few walked the streets, but Cal did spot a few familiar faces, folk who had tormented him for being Hollowborn, spat and cursed when they'd seen him. A strange form of comfort, knowing some from his old life had survived. Those struggles didn't feel real anymore. He'd not thought about his natural-born affliction for years. Hadn't needed to. He'd forged it into a source of strength, armor that he'd worn proudly. But now he felt like an exposed nerve. Raw. Whatever relief he felt faded the moment they saw him. The moment recognition flashed across their faces. New posters flashed in the dull breeze that blew down from the volcano slopes. Placed atop the old, they urged citizens to turn in anyone suspected of rebellion. a heavy reward emphasized in bold beneath. Uprisings spread all over Eudos, Ovid offered, noticing his curiosity. For a time, it seemed like everyone wanted to fight back. Even the smaller cities without chains rallied together. Raids on Davan outposts, prefects turning on the Inquisitors, chaos everywhere. A swell of pride rose in his chest, but it dropped as he looked past Ovette and at the state of the embers. What few people he could see ambled about, chipping away at long hardened molten rock. They shuffled around in rags, looking more destitute than they ever had before. The district had once prided itself on shared hardships. The people had banded together. They'd been a district of hardy miners. But now the embers held the energy of a graveyard. But it was all too late, Ovette continued, dropping her head. Some even tried to attack the new chains, tried breaking them, like you. Cal winced. Ovette didn't have to finish. Their outcome didn't need explanation. So much death, so much wasted life. It wasn't wasted. They fought for what they believed in, just like we did. No, Cal. Ovette's voice hardened. They fought because they were scared, desperate, because they didn't have any other options. But the Davins didn't care. They didn't offer solutions, only death. They are more brutal now than they've ever been, because of what we did, because of what the rebellion pushed them to do. She trailed off, turning so she didn't have to look him in the eye. Are you saying everything we went through was a waste? That it was all for nothing? Ovette wasn't to blame for how things had turned out. Cal knew that. But old habits died hard, and he needed someone to rage against. No, I'm not saying it was a waste, she replied, walking past him and continuing up the street. I'm saying we lost. They continued on in relative silence. The scant few citizens they passed by paid them no mind, too caught up in their own despair. A klaxon bellowed from somewhere far away, and the streets cleared within moments, people shutting themselves inside what remained of the buildings. It signals curfew across the city. What remains of the prefects will be patrolling the streets soon. Any caught out after dark are accused of rebellion and taken in, Ovette said, quickening her pace. We should hurry. When the orphanage came into view, whatever elation Cal had felt at the prospect of seeing Leif withered in his chest, leaving him empty and hollow. The side facing away from the volcano had survived mostly intact, albeit with several cracks spiderwebbing the walls. Up close, the real damage revealed itself. The other side of the building lay in ruins. Rubble was piled atop melted stone, hardened from years of cooling. Rooms were buried under blackened wooden frames, some clinging to their former purpose beneath layers of mottled gray ash. Ovette ignored the destruction. She passed through a hole in the wall as if it was the most normal thing to do, but Cal found it difficult to step closer. For so long, he'd held on to the hope that somehow this place had survived untouched, exactly as he remembered it. Cal, Ovette called, peering around the destroyed wall. Come on. He'll be happy to see you. Jaw clenched against the rising flood behind his eyes, Cal clambered over the debris of his childhood. The back entrance had collapsed in on itself, but he could still make out the shape of Lady Havisham's cooking station. For a moment, he swore he smelled her stew, felt the bite of her hand as she chided him for setting a bad example for the littles. The corner of his mouth curled up into a slight smile. This time he swallowed back the flood less successfully. Up here, Cal. He wiped his eyes and made his way up the winding stairs. The wood cracked beneath his weight, ash billowing with each step. How had Ovette managed this with Leif? Just inside Leif's bedroom, Obet laid out fresh linens and a set of ragged clothing, a faded dark green tunic with large holes in the hem, and a pair of rough-hewn trousers, dirty and speckled with ash. How often do you come here? The question felt stupid even before it left his lips. He didn't know what else to say. And worse, he already knew all her answers. Every day, she replied matter of factly, not breaking her attention away from her task of refolding the folded tunic. Why didn't you bring Leif to our hideout? The orphanage, it's. Can't, she swallowed, set the tunic down. He's not the same. He needs constant. Her fingers tightened on the fabric, and she let out a long, quivering breath. When she turned to look at Cal, the smile she'd reformed looked fragile, like it didn't belong next to the tears pooling in her eyes, so ready to betray the strength she was trying to project. He likes to sit on the balcony, likes to look at Sanctum Spire. Cal turned to the balcony door. Leif's frame was thin, his skin pale and taut over his bones, like parchment paper that had been scratched clean too many times. He's not the same as he was. Ovet's lip quivered. He. Cal moved toward the door, hesitated before pushing on the frayed and ash cracked wood. Each step deepened the pit in his stomach. His hand shaking, he gripped Leif's shoulder and choked at the bones that poked into his palm. He stepped around the chair. No amount of swallowing would hold back the flood this time. Leif. And the end of chapter 32. And on into. Or that was the end of chapter 31. This here will be 32. Sanctum Spire dominated the horizon, its silhouette cutting through the haze of fog and ash. The great monolith commanded attention, the city that surrounded its base shrouded in as much secrecy as the spire itself. The morass of chains that shot out from the spire's side made Cal's stomach churn. It didn't take much to tear away his gaze, but the view in front of him was little better. Leif sat transfixed by the horizon, his milky white eyes unmoving. A scruff of coarse white stubble framed a face that had sunken in too many places. His tunic billowed against his rake-thin frame. Leif. It's me. It's Cal. Leif jerked his head toward the sound, the semblance of his old self seeping into his features.
Cal? Is that you?
Yeah, Leif. I'm back. Leif tilted his head to the side.
Back? Where did you go?
Cal opened his mouth to respond, but Leif cut him off.
Oh, right. You've been smithing with Huel.
His bony fingers pointed at Cal.
I know Huel isn't the easiest to deal with, but you're lucky he's willing to take you on. Besides, hard work will do you good, keep you out of trouble, stop you from fighting and stealing.
Cal's stomach dropped. No words came out. Only a strangled sound caught in his throat.
Don't think I don't know about you and Jord. Lady Havisham told me everything.
Leif leaned forward in his chair and peered through the window back into the orphanage.
That reminds me. Have you seen her? She's supposed to be back by now with supper.
No, I haven't.
Ah, she must be stuck beyond the gate again. Could you send Roscoe or Prissa to fetch her? By this rate, it'll be dark by the time she gets back.
Prissa and Roscoe are out playing, Leif. Ovette appeared from the side and placed a kiss on Leif's forehead, receiving a warm-hearted smile for her effort. But don't worry, I'll be sure to fetch Lady Havisham for you.
Ah, thank you, my dear.
I just need to borrow Cal for a bit, okay? We'll be right inside. Leif's smile faded as he turned back to the horizon. Ovette took Cal by the hand and led him back inside. What's wrong with him? It's like he's stuck. He's been like that ever since I found him. Ovette kept her gaze on Leif, her voice soft. Bogdan was caring for him, sparing what he could, but he thinks everyone's alive. The Littles, Lady Havisham. He doesn't. He's he's happy, Cal. I don't want to take that away from him. He's been through too much. Besides, if we tell him the truth, I don't think his mind or body could take it. What do you mean? He's getting weaker every day. I don't think he has long left. Tears rolled down Ovette's cheeks as she spoke, but she didn't break her composure. Sit with him. I know it's hard, but he's been talking about you a lot lately. Almost like he knew you were coming back. Cal stared at Leif, his mind and body numb, moving only after Ovette gave him a gentle push toward the balcony door. He had no idea what to say as he sank back into his seat next to Leif. He wanted to confess everything, fighting for the rebellion, believing Ovette was dead, losing himself in the pain, fighting the Hand, the Lord Inquisitor, failing his friends, stealing from Prissa. Everything. He wanted so badly for Leif to listen and tell him how to fix things, how to put the world back together, or just tell him that it was okay. But all he could think of were the stories that Leif used to tell him about the brave warriors of Eudos's past, about the monsters they slayed, the princesses they saved, the people they protected. Cal felt nothing like those heroes. He'd thrown himself at a monster, but all it had done was harm the people that he loved, inciting the monster to take out its rage on the innocent. His nose tingled, his clasped hands trembled together in an attempt to hold on. But he failed. The dam broke. Sobs racked his body. His chest tightened as Shay's face flashed behind his eyelids. Quentin gripping Artie by the throat. His last words to Jord.
I'm sorry, Cal.
Leif said, the lilt of his voice surer than before. Cal looked up through bleary eyes.
I tried my best to protect you from the world, from what it needed from you, what it would take from you.
The milky film remained over Leif's eyes, but they held a lucidity to them that hadn't been there moments before.
I can't imagine the things you've gone through, the things you've had to do to survive all these long years.
Leif stretched out his hand and wrapped his skeletal fingers around Cal's.
I'm so sorry.
Cal threw his arms around Leif, careful of his fragility. The balcony door creaked. Ovette stood on the threshold, her cheeks flushed, eyes puffy. Leif! She choked as she too threw her arms around them both. She summoned her gift and pressed it against Leif's chest, but he pushed her hand away and shook his head.
There's no need for that, my dear. Don't waste your strength on an old man like me.
But Leif, please, let me. Leif held up his hand, cutting Ovette off.
It's okay. I'm here now.
He held them at arm's length, and they both remained still as Leif passed his hand over their features. Both gave him the time he needed to take them in as they were now.
You've both grown so much.
His proud smile crinkled the corners of his eyes.
I've missed you both so much. So much.
The firmness in his voice unsettled Ovette more than it did Cal, and he suspected that this clarity hadn't surfaced during her care. Leif's gaze drifted past them and out across the horizon, his smile vanishing.
The dread.
What is it? Cal asked, surprised to hear his own voice.
A god. Or something close to it,
Leif responded.
Our god, to be precise, Cal.
You mean?
Yes, Cal. You, me, the Lord Inquisitor, your father. We're not from Eudos.
Cal took the news better than he expected, although he couldn't tell if the dryness in his throat was from shock, tears, or the constant ash that clung to Igni's air. And my mother?
She was the previous Gyfted. The one Cius and I found, back when I served as Lord Inquisitor. We appointed Corsius, your father, as her guardian.
A wistful smile touched Leif's lips.
They were inseparable from the moment they laid eyes on each other. Any notion of their differences was set aside. They were a beacon for what our two peoples could be. But the dread demands sacrifice, not service. You remind me so much of your father, always throwing yourself into danger for someone, be they Davin or Uden. It didn't matter to him. He was always ready to fight for what he believed in, ready to lay down his life for the ones he loved.
Cal laced his fingers with Ovette's, but didn't look away, too afraid that if he took his off Leif for a second, he'd lose him again.
I kept something of his for you, in my study. Something I should have given you years ago. But I was too afraid. Afraid you'd run off and get yourself killed trying to save the world.
Leif squeezed Cal's free hand. A lump wedged itself in Cal's throat, and he found himself unable to do anything but listen.
You've grown into a fine young man. Promise me you'll never lose who you are.
Leif's milky gaze shifted to Ovette.
Both of you. Promise me.
Ovette kissed the side of Leif's hand. I promise. Cal forced the words out. I promise.
That's good. That's...
Leif stared at them for a while, the twitch of recognition fading from his features. After a time, his head tilted to the side once more.
Cal? Ovette? What are you doing here?
Ovette squeezed Cal's hand, but her smile held. Cal swallowed hard and breathed a weak smile. Just checking on you. Lady. His voice caught. He swallowed again. Lady Havisham said supper will be ready soon. Leif didn't respond. His empty stare returned to Sanctum Spire. Cal patted Leif's hand and made his way to the balcony door, looking back long enough to see Ovette pressing a kiss to Leif's forehead. The next few days passed by in a blur. Cal had returned to his and Ovette's hideout and moved whatever supplies that had survived to the orphanage. He'd cleared what rubble he could from his home, although some sections were so damaged he feared the rubble itself was the only thing keeping the structure standing. The hardest part, the part that took him the longest to do, was building Leif's spire. His mind wandered back to a time when Leif had asked him to help build Roskell and Lady Havisham's. Cal wondered how things might have turned out if he'd stayed with Leif, rather than stealing his sword and running off to play hero. Leif's age remained a mystery. The stubble that lined his chin had always been a mix of white and gray. Cal had given up wondering over the years because to him Leif was ageless, always able to match the little's vigor as they tore through the orphanage at full speed. What Cal wouldn't give to listen in on one of Leif's stories again, to watch the wrinkles in his face deepen as he enchanted the runaways and the forgotten of Igni with tales of bravery and compassion. Now the figure lying in his bed looked as though all his long years had descended on him at once. Lady Havisham had made sure every soul that passed under this roof was well fed, that none ever went without food. But the weight of her hearty cooking had melted from Leif's frame. His pale skin and once distinguished cheekbones now served to emphasize how his face looked. He was diminished, tired, smaller, and Cal felt a sudden, shameful wash of guilt. Leif's eyelids fluttered open. He held up his frail hand, fingers grasping at air. Cal pulled over a chair and enveloped the searching hand with both of his. Ovette entered moments later and lowered herself onto the bed, perched near Leif's chest. Ovette, can you ease his pain? Cal asked, his voice cracking. At once, Ovette's hand glowed with a soft white flame that shimmered and swayed. She pressed it to Leif's chest. He sighed in relief as the light seeped into him, his breathing steadying. Cal's own chest felt constricted. He knew Ovette had the power to do more, knew she could likely heal the aged and ailing organs in Leif's body, revitalize the muscles and skin. She'd hauled Cal back from the brink of death at least once. Healing Leif's body would be a trifle for her, but no amount of gift could mend a spent spirit. He wanted to blame Ovette for not fixing Leif before he woke, for not doing everything she could to keep him alive. The thought shamed him. He wanted Leif to stay because he needed him. He wanted to hear stories where good always won out over evil, of heroes who were kind and warm, never bitter and full of hate. Cal wanted so much to blame Ovette, but he couldn't. Deep down, buried further than the grief that strangled his voice and stung his eyes, he knew it was Leif's time. Leif had filled his twilight years with love and kindness. He'd shared the best of himself with everyone who'd passed through the orphanage's door. Trapped as he was in the illusion of an aged mind, Leif was surrounded by love. How could Cal take that away from him? Ovette's light dimmed, but she kept her hand placed on Leif's chest, unbidden tears rolling down her cheeks. It'll be soon, she croaked, swallowing hard and trembling. Cal held Leif's hand close. He entwined his fingers with Leif's thin, twisted ones, like the roots of an old tree. His eyes burned as he imagined those fingers struggling to perform tasks that he himself could do so easily. Lucidity hardened Leif's features, and a hint of color touched his cheeks.
Cal? Ovette?
He said, his voice rough and dry like the scratch of a quill on paper.
You're here?
We're here, Ovette whispered, inching herself closer. We won't leave you. We're not going anywhere, Cal added, the bottom of his vision blurring. Leif settled back down, a warm smile cresting his lips as he moved his clouded eyes between the two of them.
I'm so very proud of you both. Thank you for giving an old man reason to.
His words trailed off, and Cal pressed the bony hand to his lips. It's okay, Leif. Cal swallowed hard, trembling as he caught the glint of tears on Ovette's cheeks. You can go. You don't have to stay for us. We'll be okay. Leif squeezed their hands, pulled them close to his chest, one above the other, and closed his eyes.
I know.
Cal bit back his words. He kissed Leif's brow and held there, Goodbye, Leif. He could feel the old man's pulse slowing. Leif exhaled. Ovette laid her head on his chest. We love you. Slower. Color drained from his features. Slow. His smile faded. Stop. All right, guys, I'm going to call it there for this evening. Dear God, this is a heavy part of the book. I hope you guys have enjoyed it, though. It was probably coming as a part of this. You knew Leif couldn't live forever. Leif Festus. Poor Leif Festus. But he survived long enough, I guess. Ovette is back with Cal. They no longer will have a reason to stay in Igni. And who knows what the next parts will bring. I guess we'll find out. So, thank you to all of you. As always, the greatest gift that you can give me is a gift of your time. And I appreciate that you guys gave me the gift of yours this evening, whether it was for 5 minutes or for 2.5 hours. I hope you guys enjoyed this reading of Gyfted tonight. We will finish this book on Saturday. We're on chapter 33. There are 33, 34, 35, and epilogue left. So I don't know how long the stream is going to run for on Saturday, but we are going to finish out this book on Saturday. And then that means next Tuesday, we'll start a whole new book again. And the book we are starting is The Sentinel something. I don't remember. The Sentinel Project? I want to say it's the Sentinel Project. Let's find out, shall we? Ah, yes, The Sentinel Project by Soren K. Blackwood. We will be starting that after we finish this one. So next Tuesday, we'll start The Sentinel Project. Until then, and until Saturday, if I don't see you before then, have yourselves a wonderful week ahead. Thank you so much again for spending some time with me this evening, and I will see you guys all again really soon. If you missed any of it and want to catch it, youtube.com/@SirArminius. I'll have all the chapters up later this evening. Good night, all.